Colonialism normalizes the abnormal. Georgie Wathongo. That was said by Georgie Wathongo, who passed away on May 28th last week at 87, an anti-colonialism writer from Kenya. Colonialism normalizes the abnormal. We gotta remember that in this time, y'all. What's up, everybody? Before I proceed, let me know where y'all checking in from. And also, too, let me know how you're feeling. So quick check-in. How we feeling on a scale from 1 to 10? And as y'all doing that, don't forget how Black History Can Save Your Life is available right now, family. Let me know how y'all doing on this beautiful Monday morning. The quote I said as I went live is colonialism normalizes the abnormal. That's where we are right now, family. Said by Georgie Wathongo, who passed away last week at the age of 87, anti-colonialism writer from Kenya. So let me know where y'all checking in from. And also, too, how you feeling on a scale from 1 to 10. We got some stuff to talk about. There's so much going on. I figured I would start the week with this to bombard you with all this stuff, as opposed to making a whole bunch of separate videos. And it gets heavy real quick. So let's get right into it. I don't have a whole bunch of time, and I'm sure you got stuff to do too. So let's get right into it. What's up, everybody? I saw some Memphis. I see Louisville. I think I saw California too. I ain't gonna be able to scroll up right now. What's up, Maryland? Thanks, y'all. What up, Texas? What's good with y'all? Maryland. Shout out to Maryland. And before I proceed, do not forget, y'all, how Black History Can Save Your Life is available right now. Don't forget to grab that. And also, too, if you at a school, organization, company, nonprofit, whatever, holla at your boy. Bring me to your community so that we can chop it up, so I can speak to y'all. And we can strategize and plan, y'all. Strategize and plan some things out collectively and together. So look, colonialism normalizes the abnormal. Remember that. And Georgie Wathongo, that is where we are. That is where we have been. The first story I want to tell you about, y'all, that you might not be aware of. Are you aware of what happened to our young brother, Logan Sharp, who was killed at 7 years old, vehicular homicide in Georgia? This headline is directly from Atlanta Black Star. Black Georgia family accuses cops of protecting white man who drove onto sidewalk and struck 7-year-old boy. Prosecutor refuses homicide charge. Let me know if you are aware of that story about our brother Logan Sharp, who was killed, vehicular homicide, by a white dude. All right. This young man was 7 years old, killed. And there are no charges, all right? No homicide charge. I'm going to read this directly from the Atlanta Black Star website. I want y'all to be aware of this story right here. Dalton Kaysen, a 26-year-old white man, was under the influence of fentanyl and cocaine when he struck and killed a 7-year-old black boy named Logan Sharp last year in Georgia. So this is from 2024. But Pierce County prosecutors have refused to charge him with vehicular homicide, which would be the appropriate charge under state law, because he was driving while under the influence of drugs. And this was proven by a toxicology report by the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. They already proved that he was under the influence of fentanyl and cocaine when he killed this young 7-year-old black boy, Logan Sharp. And remember, it's important to understand the demographics of this, because this is a white man who killed the black boy and there's no homicide charge. Because we understand optically, if it was black man, 26-year-old, under the influence of fentanyl and cocaine, who killed the 7-year-old white boy, that charge would be there day one, right? All right. I'm going back to the article. And it was only after the boy's family began talking about the case on social media that Kaysen was even charged with misdemeanor driving under the influence 9 months after the deadly incident and 3 months after the results were finalized. This young boy's name should be plastered everywhere. We ain't seeing it. I don't know. I didn't know about this until I was scrolling online. Shout out to Atlanta Black Star. Logan Sharp. That should be a household name in our community for those of us who are concerned about the well-being of our folks. That young boy was 7 years old. Now, here's what's even more disturbing to me about this story in terms of our awareness and support. The family has a GoFundMe set up, right? Their goal is $100,000. I want you to guess how much money they've been able to raise so far. The goal is $100,000. How much money do you think this Black family has been able to raise? This family in Georgia who lost a 7-year-old child, Logan Sharp, to vehicular homicide. Logan Sharp, that's SHARPE. Thank you for the question and clarification. Yeah, Logan Sharp, SHARPE, like Shannon Sharp. This family has only raised, y'all, $1,500. $1,500. Somebody said $2,400. You're close. $1,500. Comparatively, white woman from, what was that? Minnesota, right? Who was caught on video demonizing a black child around the same age, ridiculing them, calling them the N-word repeatedly. At this point, she probably got $1 million. Last I heard, it was $600,000-$700,000. This Black family has only raised $1,500. They lost their son due to vehicular homicide last year in Georgia. So all you have to do is Google Logan Sharp, Georgia, GoFundMe, and that will pop up. Because I can't place the link right here. But Google Logan Sharp, Georgia, GoFundMe. That's SHARPE. I can't spell this morning. All right. We got to support this family, and we have to put pressure on that state, the state's attorney, to elevate those charges. Because remember this name too, just like you remember hashtag Logan Sharp, remember Dalton Kaysen. I think I'm pronouncing that name correctly. That's the 26-year-old white man who was under the influence of fentanyl and cocaine when he struck this boy on the sidewalk. I'm also wondering, because I only have a very brief understanding of this so far, I'm wondering how that accident happened. The accident, right? He was under the influence, but the boy was also on the sidewalk. So I'm wondering how that accident happened. So we got to make sure we elevate this family and elevate that name. Logan Sharp was 7 years old, Black boy killed by Dalton Kaysen, 26-year-old white man under the influence of fentanyl and cocaine. And he was charged with a misdemeanor driving under the influence as opposed to being charged with a homicide as he should have. This family has only raised $1,500. So the reason is we don't know about it. And I know that, right? Because we'll support the family if we know about it. But this story isn't making making mainstream news. I haven't seen it outside of the Atlanta Black Star. So we got to make sure we elevate that family, y'all. So as soon as you leave here, be sure to search that name. Logan Sharp with the E on the end, Georgia, GoFundMe. All right. Now let's move on to the next story, y'all. Let's move on to the next story. Don't forget our quote, our focus, our quote is by Georgie Wathongo. Colonialism normalizes the abnormal. We have to ensure that we realize the conditions we are under, and that story I just shared with you is not normal. It is abnormal to the highest degree. All right. Number two, let me know if y'all are aware that the Tulsa mayor, our brother Monroe Nichols, is proposing a $105 million Greenwood Trust to address the legacy of the 1921 race massacre. Are you aware of that, family? Let me know. Let me know in the chat if you are aware of that. Now, that just happened, I believe, this past week, okay? That just happened this past week. Now, this is what I love about this story. Besides the fact that it is going against the Oklahoma State Supreme Court that said they were not going to give them reparations, this shows grassroots activism, right? The Justice for Greenwood Initiative has been focusing on this. This shows the results of grassroots activism. All politics is local. Now, we know, of course, that the city should have been done something. The state government should have already did something. Federally, something should have already been done, right? They did an investigation under the Biden administration with the Department of Justice, right? But this is what happens when we have the right representation, because y'all, representation matters. I always say is a incomplete sentence. I say that with me. Representation matters is an incomplete sentence. Representation matters when you represent the will of the people. So this brother, black man, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Monroe Nichols, is proposing a $105 million Greenwood Trust to address the legacy of racism. This includes money for infrastructure repair, housing, home ownership, to support massacred descendants and the area, right? Scholarships. This does not include direct cash payments, however, but this is a form of reparation. So we have to also consider and remember that according to the United Nations, reparations has 5 pillars, right? And one of them is compensation, direct compensation. This somewhat includes that, but not directly, but could be more likely or more appropriately placed under the restitution category of reparations. And that is, this involves restoring the victim to their original situation before the violation occurred. This could include restoring liberty, rights, property, citizenship, and even returning one's place of residence. We understand that there are even people who are still alive who dealt with that. I believe the sister's name is Miss Fletcher, right? 111 years old. She just turned 111. So we need to make sure that continues. And what I believe is very interesting about this too is, looking this up, I found out that this does not require city council approval in Tulsa. I like that. This is a trust. It will only require city council approval if they want to transfer city assets to descendants or people who have been impacted by this. The goal is to raise the funds for this trust by next year. All right. Also with this, this brother has already commemorated a day to recognize the victims of this. So that's another thing that is included under reparations. So if they can raise this money for this trust within the next year, we'll begin to see some form of reparations begin to happen in that community on a more consistent basis. I think we need to take note of that as we advocate for reparations in our different jurisdictions and areas and things like that. I mean, if we're being honest, we know on a federal level right now, it's just not going to happen. We know who we got in office, right? We know we got Trump. You know what I'm saying? We know we're outnumbered. So, but if we begin to advocate on a city level, a county level, a state level, we can begin to make that happen. And by the time we have someone in office who is more likely to support this, we can begin to see the results that we desire and we need. We can demand that our mayors, our local city councils create a trust for communities, because we know that Black Wall Street and the Tulsa race massacre, that act of terrorism, is what we are most aware of that happened. But we know that every city across this country has done damage to Black folks historically. It's not just Tulsa. It's just they are the most prominently known. So we can demand a trust be formed. And that way people can give to it. The money can be raised. So let's use this as an example of how we can organize, y'all. Let me know again if you were aware of that news story. Let's keep going. The next story that we need to know about, because there's so much going on, y'all. Virginia is advancing an investigation into displacement of Black communities by public universities. All right. Now, this is a story that, again, all of us can kind of relate to and connect with. The Virginia General Assembly has allocated funds to a state-sanctioned commission investigating how the expansion of public university campuses has historically displaced Black communities. This legislative commission aims to formally assess and address the legacy of Black land loss and community disruption. Shout out to my family at Where Is My Land and Kavon Ward, who are doing very important work around this already. All right. So the commission's establishment follows investigative reports revealing that universities nationwide have uprooted tens of thousands of families of color, contributing to Black land loss and lagging rates of Black ownership. Y'all, we have to remember another quote. All right. Outside of the quote that I opened this up with, we also have to remember that nothing's wrong with us. Something happened to us. We are the victims and targets of this system. When we look at the wealth disparity that exists in our community, it's not because of what we have done or have not done. It's because of the way the system has impacted us. Families have been forcibly removed from their land. That's like the university colonialism is what it is. To expand their universities, to expand their so-called learning institutions, to expand highways. We are always the first ones who are displaced. And that continues to happen. There are a few other examples of this. So Virginia is doing a study to help out black families who have been displaced by university expansion. But it's not just in Virginia. Let's think about the University of Chicago, around the Hyde Park and Kenwood neighborhood in Chicago. There are over 4,000 families who have been displaced. 4,000 families that we know of that have been displaced for the University of Chicago. All right. For UPenn, the University of Pennsylvania, they cleared the Black Bottom neighborhood in West Philadelphia, displacing more than 700 African-American families in a thriving black business district, y'all. So it's not just Virginia. It's not just Tulsa, right? And we also know that the University of Pennsylvania is complicit in continuing the harm that was done to the MOVE community with the MOVE bombing and holding on to the remains of that family, the children who were killed with that act of terror by the Philadelphia Police Department. Johns Hopkins University evicted over 1,100 families in East Baltimore, with 90% of those families being black. So it's not just Virginia. I'm telling y'all this because every time you come across a story of injustice and it does not seem to directly impact you and your community, I want you to begin to think about, let me see if there's a similar story where I'm at. Because I'm sure and I'm certain there is. What up, Allie, by the way? I hope you're doing well. Shout out to you, Allie. Doing great work out there in California. Doing great work out there. Make sure y'all follow her. University of Georgia, let's keep going. Demolish the Lenintown neighborhood in Athens, Georgia, displacing approximately 50 black families to build student dormitories. This stuff is still happening. It is already happening. So if Virginia can begin to study this, a place that is directly connected with 1619, we got to understand that if you see those colleges right in the middle of the city and there are black families around them, then it's likely that there were black families right there. Just like we know we've been displaced due to the highways, right? The highway expansion and creation. We have been displaced for university creation and expansion. We have been displaced for prison creation and expansion. And many of our communities, particularly, I know for sure, the one I live in now in Joliet, Illinois, which is about 45 minutes from Chicago, they eradicate the economic infrastructure that holds our community together, which forces our black business districts to go out of business. And then they remove us from that land. So we don't have ways to make money and provide for our family. And instead of reinvesting in those communities that have had so much stripped away, they then build prisons. They then build jails to build their infrastructure, to build their economy, and to further cement permanent racial underclass. I see somebody also said Indiana has done it. Y'all, I'm telling y'all, it's everywhere. So when I share these stories, remember, think about how is this impacting me where I live too? Do some research, go to city council meetings, raise awareness. Everybody has to mobilize around this time period, y'all. Old Dominion University expanded into the Lamberts Point neighborhood in Norfolk, Virginia, for example, displacing various black families, as I'm looking at my document right here. This is happening everywhere. When we talk about, again, shout out to Where's My Land, an organization I often collaborate with. Shout out to them and Kavon Ward for the work they do. This is bigger than we know. We're talking about black farmers who have had their land stolen. We're talking like 90% of the land that we own has been stripped away from the early 1900s to now. We owned more land, y'all, 100 years ago. Like, can we make sense of that? I want to say that a few more times, y'all. Because when we talk about progress, we think it's often a linear thing. And again, even when I talk about progress, I mean political progress. We don't need to make the progress. We have been and are always capable. But we exist within a system of violence and a structure of violence, y'all, that has stripped so much away from us and then refuses to teach us the history of that happening so we can't notice the patterns. We think it's just happening now. History is, we're talking about the studying human patterns and behavior. Tell people like that. Tell people that. When we study history, we are studying the patterns of human behavior. That's it. If they took our land 100 years ago, do you think they had an epiphany to stop doing it now? It's the same concept, right? We owned more black land 100 years ago than we do now. Imagine how much that land would be worth right now if we were able to hold on to it. After having so much stripped from us, we still found ways to own land. There was a 400-year head start folks had, and we still came out the gate owning land, and we were able to cultivate it because of what we were forced to do and because of what we came here with. Because we didn't learn how to do it here. We were already farming, right? It just wasn't under those conditions. And now many of us, including myself, live in areas where we are so detached from that. I don't know how to farm. I don't know how to till land. I wouldn't know what to do, right? So much has been stripped away. We have to regain that. And a lot of that cannot just be by pulling yourself up. We understand you have to have a certain level of self-determination. You have to have a certain level of might and grit. But that has to be joined with proper policy because of what has been taken away from us. So that third point I was telling y'all about is Virginia is investigating the displacement of black communities by public universities. And I'm telling y'all that it ain't just happening in Virginia. It didn't just happen in Virginia. It's happened in various other places too, in the Chicago area. Somebody said Indiana. I'm certain in California. We could keep going. All right, the next story we got to be aware of, y'all. Now, how much have we heard about the black families who were impacted by the tornadoes? We haven't heard. Now, really, we could take it a step back. We haven't heard that much about black families who were displaced in the Los Angeles area because of those wildfires, I believe, in January. Now, we heard about it when it was happening then, but it became a social media trend. And here's the issue with that, right? Things can trend for a moment and we get the clicks, the views, the donations are up and everything. But we have to remember that when we're talking about tragedies, y'all, we're talking about real people, real folks' lives at hand. So just because we've moved on in the news cycle does not mean that our folks in California aren't still suffering from what happened. And it's not that we can do everything, but just remembering means something. Just checking back on that Google Doc means something. So with that said, we have to deal with the black families that have been displaced due to the May 16 tornadoes. As I go back to my document, in the aftermath of the May 16 tornado that struck parts of St. Louis, black residents are facing disproportionate mental health burdens, as well as a lack of proper funding and relief. The disaster left 5 people dead and displaced hundreds, with mental health professionals urging affected individuals to seek support and process the trauma and begin healing. The tornado caused $1.6 billion in damage, destroying over 5,000 structures. Federal aid has been requested, but is still pending. Now, look, I'm going to pause right there. Our family that is majority black in St. Louis that has been impacted by these tornadoes. So now we're talking about climate warfare. Because who is most impacted by climate change? Us first. It's going to impact everybody, let's be clear. But we are most often in communities that will be on the front lines of this. And you can't fight this war with weapons. Our folks need federal relief and support now. Who's in office? Do we think he's going to provide federal relief or support for them? It's not likely, right? This speaks to the urgency of having the right people in office on all levels. We don't have to agree with every single thing people do, but we also have to think about which person in office is most likely to do the common sense thing when faced with a disaster. And who can we most likely work with and agitate for change? Now we have a situation in St. Louis where our folks down there are probably not going to get the relief they desire and need. You can, however, and I'm not somebody who's on the ground there, so there are probably, of course, better resource suggestions people can give for the folks who live there. But something I came across real quick is stlgives.org. All right. stlgives.org is a great place to go if you want to find a way to support our folks in St. Louis who are dealing with the aftermath of those tornadoes from a couple weeks ago. Shout out to my brother, Trader Truth, too, because Trader Truth is always mobilizing efforts and going to communities impacted by natural disasters. Shout out to that brother. If you don't know who Trader Truth is, he's a hip hop artist and a community activist. Whenever I see a tragedy happen that mostly impacts our folks, he is there, boots on the ground. So stlgives.org will allow you to find a way to support in any way you can. And somebody said it too. We have to remember what this president is doing, right? Of course, the attacks are coming at us directly. We see it explicitly, but it's impacting all Americans. Don't get it twisted. Everybody will be impacted by this, right? The folks in St. Louis who have been impacted are not all black, right? The folks who are going to be impacted by some of these laws and policies that I'm going to get to in a second, it's not just us. It's everyone. But the way race and racism works in this society, a lot of white folks will feel comfort believing that they can still just be a little bit better than us. Like, we might lose it all. They might lose 95% of what they have and feel like they're still doing well. He's waging a war that's going to impact the whole economy. You know what I'm saying? So, like, we have to come together as people above all. We got to come together as people, common humanity above all. All right, so that was my number 4. The fourth thing I needed y'all to know. We got to support our folks in St. Louis, the black community in St. Louis, and do not forget about Altadena, California. Can you believe, y'all, that that was almost 5 months ago, right? They still need our support. All right, let's move on. Shout out to my folks in Memphis. This is about you right here. I think I saw somebody from Memphis was in here checking in the chat. Again, I'm not in these communities directly. I'm reading headlines and news stories, so I know there are people on the ground who probably have even more information about stuff like this. But I have shared a couple stories about what's going on in Memphis. All right, now peep game. Elon Musk's artificial intelligence company, XAI, is at the center of a significant environmental controversy in Memphis, Tennessee. The company's supercomputer facility, known as Colossus, has been operating approximately 35 methane gas turbines without the necessary air pollution permits. These turbines emit hazardous pollutants, including nitrogen oxides and formaldehyde, which are linked to respiratory issues such as asthma. Notably, the facility is situated, surprise, surprise, near predominantly black neighborhoods like Boxtown and Westwood, areas already burdened with high pollution levels and health disparities. Y'all, first thing I want to say is, this ain't start with Elon Musk. When we talk about racism as an entity, we also discuss environmental racism. I grew up on the far south side of Chicago. My neighborhood and the projects that were about a mile away were right next to areas like this that polluted our water, that polluted our air, right? Right next to landfills and things like that. This is the system. This is what they do. It's, well, let's just dump it in their neighborhood. That's the idea, right? You know what I'm saying? Like our neighborhoods are viewed as dump sites for the elite, for the wealthy. And I don't even really like saying elite because there ain't really nothing elite about them, but the economic elite. They view our websites, they view our neighborhoods as dump sites. This is directly linked to the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, which I have on my list too. And why is it? Look, y'all, this is crazy, right? One of the components of that so-called Big Beautiful Bill that has made its way through the House and is possibly going to be passed by the Senate this month is a 10-year state ban on AI regulations. So they want to be able to do things like this and eliminate our state governments from creating things that can limit that from happening. They don't want our state governments to put restrictions in place so that they can do things like this and continue this AI takeover and use our neighborhoods and communities as dump sites. Again, I'm curious to know, for those of you who are outside of Memphis specifically, were you aware of this? This is something I became aware of online, right? Yo, this is crazy too, because like we got to seriously think about what is the news functioning as for us right now? What is the mainstream news? And that includes the mainstream news, social media websites. What are they functioning as for us right now? They are continuing to peddle misinformation, disinformation, distractions, keeping us off task of what's really important for us. All of these things, although they seem to be happening in different communities, impact us directly. I see folks in the chat talking about it because it's true. It ain't just Memphis. It happens in Chicago, Gary, Indiana, right? The neighborhoods in Detroit, Milwaukee, the black neighborhoods. When you see the overabundance of us being born and having asthma and respiratory issues, that's not our fault. This is why these things happen, the trends, the patterns. Again, y'all, think of this, think of our nation, because firstly, as a neighborhood, if something happened to somebody on the next block, I want you to think about what's stopping them from coming down your neighborhood to do the same thing. These state lines are illusionary. So we have to be informed so that we can know what we need to mobilize against and organize for. I saw somebody mention it here too, and it's very important during this time. Mutual aid. GoFundMe is a form of that. Going back to the first story I shared about Logan Sharp, we have to support our communities. We got to support our people as much as we can until we can figure out the grand scheme of things. The least we can do is support in that way financially. The St. Louis community needs that support. Logan Sharp's family needs that support. Altadena, California needs that support. Our Memphis family needs awareness raised on this issue. Going back to my document, community members and environmental groups have expressed deep concerns over the lack of transparency and regulatory oversight. Thermal imaging has suggested that more turbines are active than XAI has acknowledged. In response to mounting pressure, XAI has begun removing some turbines as new electrical substations come online, but many remain operational. The NAACP and local leaders have called for immediate action to halt the facility's operations until it complies with environmental regulations. They argue that the situation exemplifies environmental racism. Of course it does. Where marginalized communities disproportionately bear the brunt of industrial pollution. Remember back to Project 2025, like eradicating the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Shout out to them. I've collaborated with them before. That's why they want to get rid of all of these checkpoints, all of these all of these accountability measures, so that they can do things like this. Just imagine how all of this works together. Again, like The playbook was there. So now we're at a point where we can see exactly what they wanted to do. And now we're seeing it being implemented in a step-by-step process. We have only been under this for, 3 months? 4 months right now, y'all? It is absolutely insane. And as Ali said, data centers pollute our air and water. Yes, indeed. And here's what's interesting too, right? The same situation we see happening now is something that we can also go back some years ago and say, that's what was happening in Flint, Michigan, right? Whenever they began to do these things on a smaller scale, we can see, especially if we don't stand up in large amounts, it's really a test. It's an experiment. Literally, just like the projects insinuates, public housing is a science project. It's an experiment on people. When they do this on smaller communities like a Flint, Michigan, it is so that they can see what happens and what the response will be, so that they can implement it again on a larger scale moving forward. When I was in the classroom, one of the trends I often noticed was that, we normally get things technologically in this country after it has been available to our military for like 30, 40 years. I've noticed that. And I bring that up because we have to also look at things domestically that way too. When they do it to one community, override it. So again, when they are able to do this on a smaller scale in one community and get away with it, it is so that they can do it again to other communities, most often Black communities, brown communities, low income communities. Going back to the military example, we got the internet like in the 90s. They were already using the internet in like the 50s in the military. You know what I'm saying? We can use drones for our videos, right? And for our YouTube and Facebook and Instagram pages. But they were first using drones to kill innocent people overseas. They tested on other people first, and then they allow us access to it. So we have to make sure we are mobilizing around those efforts too, and staying aware and staying alert. That brings me to number 6, y'all. There's so much going on, so much going on. Job Corps has been eradicated by this administration and the Department of Labor. I became aware of this on Friday, and it directly impacts me too, because I live in a community, Joliet, Illinois, where one of the high schools, when it was closed down, was transformed into a Job Corps center. And we know, like these institutions, organizations aren't perfect, but they did a great service for our kids who weren't able to maybe acquiesce to a more traditional public school setting. I want you to also understand, y'all, that much of what he's undoing directly comes from what era? The Black-led civil rights movement, aka the Negro Revolution, the human rights struggle. These policies were implemented by force because of our folks who were organizing back then. Forced folks like Lyndon Johnson to pass policy like this that would help all people, particularly us. Job Corps is in some communities serving probably all Black people. Statistically, it's at least 50%. Most of that 50% of our community that is serving is going to be young boys. They're teaching our community trades so that they can, and they're many times allowing them to be removed from the communities that suffer from structural violence that are harming them, right? So that they don't become a product of that structural violence, so that they can then have a trade and be able to be an asset to our community. Think about the impact that's going to have long term. Think about how productive a lot of our young men and women were because of that program. You have to consider that there are countless studies, especially in my city, Chicago, about how violence is overwhelmingly reduced when you have our young boys working over the summer. It's common sense, right? I don't think we need these studies, but that's the type of society we live in. And, you know, we got to have a study that proves it. But it's common sense. When you have work to do, when you are able to provide for yourself, when you are busy doing something, you're more productive and less likely to engage in activity that can be deemed criminal, which is honestly just a result of this criminal enterprise of a system. Deeper than that, institutions like Job Corps, with the support that it gets from community members, helps our kids find purpose. I have a very close friend that I'll be speaking to tomorrow, actually, on my Substack, that worked there and it can speak to that. Job Corps has been a tremendous asset to many of our communities across the country. And with that said, make sure you do subscribe to my Substack, y'all. Link in the bio. Substack is the same name, Mr. Krim 3. And the last thing, y'all, the last thing before I get on out of here is the big, beautiful bill. Why do we have to be aware of this? This is going to be one of the most detrimental legislative policies passed if we are not diligent about this right here. So this so-called big, beautiful bill, which already passed through the House, is likely going to be passed through the Senate unless we are able to mobilize. Now, Democrats are outnumbered in the House and the Senate, so that poses a problem. But you have some Republicans who would describe themselves as moderate who might vote against it. Now, what can happen if this so-called big, beautiful bill is passed? It will defund Medicaid. So we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars being removed from the only thing we had in this country that was close to universal health care. So it's going to remove funding from Medicaid, which impacts us the most in the Black community, but it impacts all people, right? This is, again, something that came from the Black-led civil rights movement. This will require a lot of people to lose coverage. It will impose strict work requirements and frequent eligibility checks, which can result in millions of people losing their coverage. We have to think about the elderly, the young folks, and think about the folks who aren't able to actually work because of pre-existing conditions. He is out here trying to kill our people. Now we know what the structural violence looks like. This is a direct attack. Additionally, this so-called big, beautiful bill will increase funding for ICE. We're talking about $47 billion more to build more walls, to increase deportations. $47 billion. Can you imagine? Just think about this, right? Contextually. We talking 5 years ago, people said, defund the police, which we know, for those of us who are in the know, that just meant reallocate those sources. That's just reform. We saying reallocate those sources so that we can have more resources for our community. 5 years later, y'all, the 5 years to the month with all these uprisings were going on all across the country. Now we have a bill that's likely going to get passed that increases funding for border police, building more walls, for abducting people off the street. And this, of course, we know is impacting a lot of brown folks. It's impacting Black folks, too. It's a human rights issue, above all. This so-called big, beautiful bill, like I said before, will also place a 10-year ban on state AI regulations, which we know, based on what I was talking about, will impact our folks in Memphis, Tennessee, with the XAI situation they have going on, which has been created by Elon Musk. All of this, the end justifies the means. It goes and it leads to the same road, y'all, to enrich the economic elite. Another thing it's going to do, it's going to reduce the funding for SNAP, or food assistance or food stamps, whatever you want to call it. SNAP, aka the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. He wants to defund that. That's a direct way to kill people, right? He wants to limit the amount of money that can go towards providing our children with food from low income situations. They want to cut over $300 billion from SNAP over the next decade. This would be the largest reduction in the plan's history. $300 billion. So we're saying at this point, if we agree with that, we're telling kids to, just work harder, kids. I know you 5, you 6, you come from a low income situation, work harder. Feed yourself, right? This is absolutely maniacal, y'all. All of this is under the guise of the so-called big, beautiful bill. And you got to just love the euphemisms in political legislation in America, because they'll pass things like the Patriot Act, and it's something that's the exact inverse of supporting the American people. This is known as the big, beautiful bill, but it's going to make things ugly, y'all. It's going to get super ugly if this thing passes. So with the SNAP reduction in funding, it will increase work requirements. And it would also, as I'm reading, the exemption from work requirements would apply only to those with children under 7 years old, down from the previous threshold of 18. And for older adults, the age at which work requirements no longer apply would increase from 54 to 64, which would affect more seniors. So instead of being able to get that at 54, you're going to have to work till you're 64. I want you to even think about like average life expectancies in America. Which demographic has the lowest life expectancy in America, right? Our indigenous brothers and sisters and black folks. Black men, as a single demographic, have the lowest life expectancy in this country at about 67, and it's lower in some areas. We already exist in communities that are suffering from food apartheid, food deserts. So think about that compound trauma, that compounded way of starving us. What are the ways in which they were able to eradicate the indigenous people of this land, to continue and complete their genocide? What did they do? They removed their food source. The buffalo, they killed their food source. What's happening right now? They're removing our food source. Yeah, this will impact us, but this will impact all Americans who are in the lower economic class. What's happening right now in Palestine? Removing their food source. All of these things are connected, folks. So what can we do with this right here? Look, we are outnumbered in terms of people who would vote against something like that. But according to thehill.com, there are some Republican senators who might vote in opposition to this bill. I was on a panel with Rep. Lauren Underwood and Rep. Max Frost this weekend. They're like, again, from their perspective, what we need to do, again, from their political perspective, there are other ways that we can counter this. But from what they are suggesting, they said we have to call Republican senators. Okay, we have to make sure they know, even if we aren't in their state, that we are against this and we want better. We got to call them to the point where they have to unplug their phone. I got 6 people we can strategize and do this with. And all you have to do is Google their numbers. No emails, call them. All right, call them, because the Congress, the Senate, they're back in session this week. They might begin to vote on this week or later this month. So we talking. I got 6 for y'all. Senator Lisa Murkowski, a Republican in Alaska. Call her and tell her that she needs to vote against this so-called big, beautiful bill. Senator Josh Hawley, a Republican from Missouri. Call him and let him know that we are adamantly against this big, beautiful bill. Look, y'all, we don't have to agree with these people, but we got work to do. We have lives to save. So this is a way that we agitate the system, right? I'm always of the perspective of we have to have people who agitate the system and those who will create. With all of the issues I have brought up, we got to get in tune with people who are creating. I see conversation happening right now in the chat. Very proactive conversation. What resources exist for our community in case this passes? How can we continue to provide food for our most vulnerable people? How can we continue to provide healthcare access, job training access to our most vulnerable people in our community? So again, we call in Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. We're calling Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri. We're calling Senator Susan Collins from Maine. We're calling Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky. We're calling Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. We're calling Senator Thom. We're calling Senator, excuse me, y'all, Senator Thom Tillis from North Carolina. All right, I'm going to go through that again. We need to call Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska. Google these names. Get their numbers. We need to call Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri. Senator Susan Collins from Maine. Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky. Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. And Senator Thom Tillis from North Carolina. All right, we got to get on that. Agitate and create. At the same time, what can we create? So I'm going to go through these headlines real quick for y'all because I talked about a lot. I'm going to keep this on my page so that y'all can rewatch this. But in the meantime, let's get to work. Let's organize. Hit me up, ErnestCram.com. If you need me to come to your community, virtually or otherwise, let's connect. Let's get this done. Also, don't forget my book, How Black History Can Save Your Life. If you want to support my work, this helps. If you want to support my work, become an IG subscriber, become a patron, subscribe with a paid membership on my Substack. I need your help, y'all, because I'm doing this all independent too. So thank you for the follows and support. But anything you can give financially also helps me to continue to do this work independently. All right, here are the stories I went through. Here are the stories I went through. And I'm going to say the names of those senators again, too, because I don't have like captions right now. All right, don't forget about our young brother, Logan Sharp, who was killed, vehicular homicide in Georgia last year at the age of 7 by a 20-something-year-old white man who was only being charged with a misdemeanor. Google Logan Sharp with the E, Georgia GoFundMe. They only have $1,500. That family needs our support. Story 2. Tulsa mayor is proposing $105 million Greenwood Trust to address the legacy of the Tulsa race massacre and act of terrorism. That's a form of reparations. It's not direct cash payments yet, but it's a step in the right direction. Number 3, y'all, we talked about how Virginia is advancing investigations into the displacement of black communities by public universities. All right. Remember, this is happening all over the country and has happened. Look up Where Is My Land? All right. And Kavon Ward. That organization and that sister right there is doing very important work already on this. And they are primarily based in California. Again, that's Where Is My Land? Number 4, we talked about the challenges our black family in St. Louis is facing following the tornado that happened in May. We also talked about Altadena, California. Our folks are still struggling. Look, one of the best things we could do, y'all, is find nonprofits and mutual aid initiatives to give to weekly or monthly. Every little bit matters. 5 at a time. If we all giving 5, that makes a tremendous difference. All right. Number 5, we talked about how Elon Musk is polluting our communities in Memphis, Tennessee. Okay, we got to be aware of that. This is going to cause an insane amount of damage, that compound damage that's already being done on the health of our community. This is environmental racism. This is why he wanted to be involved in this administration. Number 6, we talked about Job Corps being eradicated. How can we provide services for our youth outside of Job Corps? Remember, Job Corps is just a name. It's just an organizational name. It was composed of people in the community who were concerned in doing the real work. we can do that too. And then we talked about the big, beautiful bill, so-called, which will decrease funding for Medicaid. It will increase funding for ICE, Border Patrol, for the police, essentially. It will implant a 10-year ban on state AI regulations, and it will decrease funding for food resources for our most vulnerable people. It's going to cut SNAP funding. It's going to cut food stamps. They are saying our kids, our elderly, do not deserve to have a meal every day. Now, in closing, again, this is who we need to be calling. Senator Lisa Murkowski, a Republican from Alaska. Senator Lisa Murkowski. All right. We need to be calling Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri. All right. We need to be calling Senator Susan Collins from Maine. We need to be calling Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky. We need to call Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. And we also need to call Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina. Let them know we are against this so-called big, beautiful bill. Hopefully we can have enough impact to have them vote against it. But in the meantime, we got to get proactive, because even if this does not pass, we ain't even through 1 year with this dude. He's going to keep trying to get this stuff through. And sometimes they sneak it under other bills. So where's the food assistance coming from for our people? Where's the health care? Where's the new Job Corps? Who's helping counter environmental racism? We got to keep all of that in mind, y'all. I'm about to sign off. I'm going to save this, but do not forget, share this, support our people, contact those senators. If you want to support my work, don't forget the book, become a subscriber on all platforms. Let's get to work, y'all. We got this.